Have you ever had one of those weeks where you finally managed to overcome a massive, seemingly impossible hurdle, only to be immediately blindsided by a completely normal, mundane disaster?
Oh, absolutely. It's like you survived the worst presentation of your life, right?
Right, yeah.
You walk out of the boardroom feeling like you just conquered the world.
And then you immediately step off the curb, twist your ankle, and drop your phone straight down a storm drain.
Exactly. The universe just instantly humbled you.
It really does. And that jarring emotional whiplash, that sudden cruel drop from surviving the extraordinary straight into the grinding teeth of gritty reality, that is exactly the territory Zayn, Kanu, and the young prince are trapped in today.
Yeah, they are really going through it.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're dropping right back into the suffocating heat of the Yemeni desert to unpack episode 27, The Stranger in the Mask from Chasing Death.
And I have to say, the atmosphere of this chapter is incredibly oppressive. I mean, if you recall the setup, we are on day 5 of an absolutely punishing 6-day journey.
6 days of pure desert survival.
Right, and the travelers are moving like specters. They're effectively hiding from the blistering sun during the day, just trying not to bake alive and only daring to travel under the cover of night.
Which gives the whole thing this really eerie, tension-filled vibe.
It does, because they have temporarily outpaced their immediate pursuers from the fallen city of Nineveh, but the tension hasn't dissipated at all. It's just turned inward.
Yeah, they're physically safer than they were back amidst the falling towers of their home, but psychologically, the isolation of that desert is just breaking them down.
It's wearing away at their sanity piece by piece.
And the narrative camera really pushes in on Zayn's internal state here. He is consumed by this hollow, gnawing dread regarding their destination.
Because they are heading toward the border to seek sanctuary with a distant relative of Kanu's.
Right, and the terrifying variable for Zayn is that this relative is a complete stranger to him. I mean, he's tormented by the very real possibility that this man's greed might just win out, that he might simply sell the young prince to the skies, who are undoubtedly still hunting them.
It's a heavy burden to carry when you're already exhausted.
Okay, let's unpack this because it feels so universally human, even in a high fantasy setting like this. It's essentially a form of anticipatory anxiety. Have you ever noticed how the closer you get to a high-stakes destination, whether it's a final job interview or, signing a mortgage, the louder your internal doubts become?
Oh, for sure. You start projecting these elaborate worst-case scenarios.
Exactly. You're essentially building a prison inside your own mind before anything bad has actually happened.
Yeah, imposter syndrome or anticipatory anxiety definitely covers the surface of what you're describing. But what Zayn is experiencing is actually more akin to pure survival paranoia.
Survival paranoia. That makes sense.
Because he isn't just doubting his own skills,
Yeah.
He is doubting the fundamental reality of his situation. He's trying to mathematically calculate an uncontrollable variable.
Human nature.
Exactly, human nature. You can't predict what a stranger will do when gold is on the table. And the brilliance of the author's world building here is that this psychological dread isn't allowed to just fester in Zayn's head.
Oh, right, because of how the magic system ties into the environment.
Yes. In this universe, intense, localized psychological pressure often precedes a thinning of the natural world. So the environment violently mirrors his internal chaos.
It's almost cinematic.
It really is. Without warning, a howling, shrieking sandstorm erupts across the desert. It is so severe they have to wrap these thick, coarse cloths around their faces just to keep the grit from shredding their lungs.
They're forced to just cower in the lee of a massive dune and hope for the best.
And when the storm finally breaks at midday, the geography of the desert has been entirely rewritten.
It's wild. The towering dunes are simply gone. In their place are these yawning, jagged craters torn deep into the earth. It is a fundamentally unnatural transformation.
The author is using the physical geology to signal a hard boundary crossing here.
Like a warning sign.
Exactly. The sandstorm wasn't just weather, it was an energetic byproduct of the barrier between realms tearing open. They have moved out of the natural world of political danger, spies, relative betrayals, royal assassins,
Right.
and they've stepped into a landscape that is alien, hostile, and governed by an entirely different set of rules.
Which brings us to the edge of one of those massive craters. They walk up to this deep, dark, subterranean passage. And Zayn, who was just having a near panic attack about a hypothetical betrayal, actually wants to go down and investigate the pit.
It's such a strange reaction, isn't it?
Kanu tries to stop him, naturally, warning him about the miseries lurking in the dark. But before they can retreat, Tongues of fire erupt from the mouth of the pit.
And then comes the smoke.
Yeah, a thick plume of blue smoke rises, coalescing into a towering pillar that pierces the sky. And from that smoke, a literal demon materializes.
A horrifying one at that.
Razor-sharp horns, eyes the color of fresh blood that the book describes as the size of serving bowls.
Serving bowl.
I know, and a voice that sounds like the grinding of tectonic plates.
It is the absolute manifestation of ancient subterranean chaos.
Wait, I really struggle with Zayn's reaction here, because the text explicitly notes that Zayn experiences a, quote, clinical curiosity when the creature emerges.
Which is so bizarre on the surface.
Right. He initially tries to rationalize the fire as a hidden volcanic vein. And then, when a demon with serving bowl-sized eyes roars at them, Zayn projects a calm voice and essentially tries to politely negotiate.
Yes, he really tries that.
He tells the monster, hey, we're mere travelers. If we intruded, it was by mistake. Frankly, that feels completely unbelievable for a character who is just paralyzed by the fear of meeting Kanu's distant relative. How do you reconcile that inconsistency?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it seems contradictory until you look at it through the lens of a trauma response.
A trauma response.
Yeah, Zayn's clinical curiosity isn't bravery. It is desperate intellectualization. When the human mind is confronted with something that completely shatters its understanding of reality, it often retreats into hyper-rationality to protect itself.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it like that.
Zayn trying to categorize the fire as geology is his brain violently rejecting the supernatural. It's a coping mechanism.
And his attempted diplomacy.
He is applying the rules of the civilized political world he understands to a creature that exists entirely outside of it. He is trying to impose order on pure entropy.
That is such a great point. Zayn trying to negotiate with a literal demon using polite diplomacy is like trying to stop a Category 5 hurricane by holding up a do not enter sign.
Exactly.
It's absurd, but it perfectly highlights how we desperately try to logic our way out of irrational, chaotic situations just to maintain the illusion of control. And unsurprisingly, the hurricane doesn't care about the sign.
Not even a little bit.
The demon bellows lies and immediately lunges to devour the prince. The intellect fails entirely.
And the failure of intellect is the exact trigger for Kanu's visceral kinetic response. Kanu isn't dealing in geology or diplomacy. He is operating on pure protective instinct.
He just reacts.
Right. He draws his sword and hacks with all his strength at the creature's clawed hand. The blade bites deep, but this only provokes the creature further.
It doesn't even slow it down.
In a terrifying display of supernatural rage, the demon uproots a massive ancient tree and starts swinging it like a primitive club.
And Kanu is dodging with the agility of a desert cat, but the demon starts kicking up sand, blinding them. The mechanics of the fight shift drastically here. Physical weapons are proving just as useless as Zayn's diplomacy was.
Yeah, a steel sword can cut the physical manifestation of the demon, sure, but it can't kill the chaotic energy driving it. You can't stab a natural disaster to death.
Which forces Zayn to recognize the reality of the threat. The civilized world failed.
Yeah.
The physical world is failing. He's pushed entirely into the spiritual realm.
He has no other choice.
He closes his eyes, reaches across the spiritual veil, and calls upon his benefactor, the celestial spirit of Vanya.
And the contrast in this scene is just brilliant.
The pacing of this specific sequence is breathtaking. Just as the demon hoists Kanu into the air by his leg, Vanya answers.
Just in the nick of time.
Amidst all the screaming and that grinding tectonic voice of the demon, Vanya's presence is marked by this ethereal, unhurried calm.
It changes the entire frequency of the scene.
She descends, and then it is just absolute cosmic devastation. A deafening crack of lightning splits the air. The demon laughs at first, but Vanya unleashes a relentless rain of celestial fire.
Bolt after bolt.
Lethal lightning strikes the creature's head until it turns into a living pyre, thrashing in the sand, reduced to nothing but a heap of smoldering ash.
And the aftermath is just as important. The moment it dies, the unnatural craters instantly smooth over. The dust storm vanishes. The environment violently resets to normal.
It's like it never even happened.
The environmental reset is crucial to understanding the mechanics of the magic system in this universe. The demon's presence was literally warping the physical geography. Vanya's lightning didn't just kill a monster, it cauterized the tear in the veil.
That makes a lot of sense.
And notice how draining this is for everyone. Kanu, breathless and trembling, immediately attributes the rescue to the holy gods, showing them mercy.
And Zayn doesn't correct him.
No, out of sheer exhaustion and a tactical desire to keep his supernatural cards close to his chest, Zayn decides to keep the specific truth of Vanya a secret from his companion.
So, what does this all mean? Let's talk about the cruel irony of what happens next, because this is where the emotional whiplash hits so hard. They survive this apocalyptic, world-ending demon. They ride until late afternoon, exhausted to the absolute limits of human endurance.
They're running on fumes.
They finally stumble upon this beautiful, tranquil little oasis with date palms and a cool spring. They stop just to catch their breath, water the horses, and they're instantly ambushed.
By something entirely mundane.
Yes, not by monsters, by disciplined, hardened, entirely human troops of Nebuchadnezzar. The soldiers surround them, bind them with coarse rope, and immediately turn them back toward Nineveh.
The author is drawing a very deliberate, stark line about the nature of adversity and the limits of power here.
How so?
Well, supernatural threats require supernatural solutions. Vanya's celestial fire is the perfect countermeasure to a demonic entity. But mundane political threats, like human soldiers executing the orders of an empire, they require entirely human solutions.
Right.
The spiritual realm isn't going to intervene in the messy, bureaucratic politics of kings.
And the text explicitly confirms those rules.
Yeah.
Because Zayn is tied up, draped over a horse like baggage, being carried back exactly the way they came. And in a panic, he tries to summon Vanya again.
He's desperate.
He reaches across the veil, searching for that connection. And he gets nothing. Absolute silence. The narrative notes that Vanya never appears twice in such swift succession. You can't just hit the miracle button every time you're in a jam.
And the reason Vanya can't just be a continuous miracle button is rooted deeply in how the spiritual veil operates in this lore.
It's an energy cost, right?
Exactly. Reaching across that divide and pulling a high-tier celestial spirit into the physical plane causes massive energetic friction. It burns the spiritual conduit. Zayn simply doesn't have the internal capacity to anchor her twice in one day without destroying himself.
The psychological impact of this realization on Zayn is devastating.
Because the dread he had before the sandstorm has now fully materialized, but in a completely different form.
He's picturing the worst possible outcome. The young prince being executed, his severed head placed in a golden casket and presented as a trophy in Babylon. Zayn knows the spiritual safety net is gone. The adrenaline is burned out.
It's all gone.
It makes you think about how, in our own lives, you can't rely on adrenaline or a lucky break to save you twice in one day. At a certain point, whether you are fleeing an ancient empire or just trying to survive a brutal week at work, the magic runs out. You have to rely on mundane, exhausted grit.
And that realization that salvation must come from the shadows of the human world sets the stage for the final act of the chapter. Night falls over the desert. The soldiers tie Zayn, Kanu, and the prince to separate trees at the oasis.
Confident in their capture.
Totally confident. The soldiers feast on roasted goat, celebrate their impending reward, and then they just pass out from sheer exhaustion, leaving just one single sentry awake with the sword resting on his knees.
And Zayn is straining against his coarse ropes, his limbs feeling leaden, completely devoid of hope.
And then, out of the darkness behind the guard, a shape glides through the trees.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The contrast between the two rescues in this chapter becomes so fascinating. Vanya's rescue was deafening, bright, and world-altering.
A literal lightning strike.
But the text describes this new figure as a tall, powerfully built young man in a black mask, moving with the unhurried grace of a predator. His feet barely disturb the sand. It is terrifyingly quiet.
Silent and efficient.
He steps right behind the sentry, clams his hands around the man's throat so fast and so hard the guard can't even gasp, and holds him until he goes limp.
He lowers the body without a single sound. He cuts the travelers free, silences the prince with a hand over his mouth, and leads them away to 4 waiting horses hidden in a nearby thicket.
This entire sequence is stripped of spectacle.
Entirely. It requires stealth, immense patience, and physical grit.
It is the exact opposite of a lightning bolt from the sky. And honestly, it's a powerful reflection of how actual, real-world rescues tend to happen. The things that actually pull you out of your darkest, most hopeless moments are rarely loud, flashy miracles.
No, they rarely are.
They are usually the result of quiet, grinding, unglamorous human effort. An ally working in the background. A friend who shows up without being asked. The miraculous might give you a temporary reprieve from a demon, but human endurance is what actually sustains the journey.
And once they're safe in the thicket, the stranger finally speaks, and the political landscape of the story violently shifts again.
He takes off the mask.
He pulls off the mask to reveal a handsome, determined young soldier named Yurka. He introduces himself not as a random bandit, but as a servant of Ashur, the commander of the army of Nineveh, and a staunch loyalist to the true crown.
Which completely flips the script. Yurka has been tracking them since the fall of the city, operating in the shadows, waiting for the precise tactical moment to strike.
But Yurka brings an incredibly mixed bag of news.
Yeah, the immediate hope of their rescue is completely undercut by a devastating strategic blow. Commander Ashur has been captured.
That's a huge loss.
Massive. He's currently being held in Cartagena and is bound for Babylon to be executed before the king.
The delivery of this news is key, though, because despite delivering what should be a crushing defeat for their cause, Yurka's demeanor remains fiercely defiant. He is already outlining plans to gather loyalist soldiers and retake Nineveh.
He's not giving up.
Not at all. And this fundamentally reframes the entire narrative identity of our travelers.
But are they really a resistance movement now? I mean, look at their actions. Yurka delivers this defiant speech, warns them that Nebuchadnezzar's reach is vast and his spies are everywhere, and then they immediately mount up and gallop back out into the desert night, riding toward the exact same Yemeni border they were fleeing toward in the first place.
They are still running away.
Exactly.
Well, the physical geography of their flight hasn't changed, but the intent behind it has been completely inverted.
How so?
When they started the chapter, they were passive refugees fleeing to hide. Now they are running to regroup. Yurka's presence proves that they are not alone. It proves that the structures of their fallen city still exist in the shadows.
Okay, I see.
They aren't riding toward Yemen just to survive anymore. They are riding toward Yemen to preserve the bloodline so that the rebellion has a figurehead to rally around. The stakes have evolved from personal survival to political revolution.
It's a remarkable piece of narrative engineering. We've tracked an immense thematic journey today. I mean, we started with Zayn's psychological dread, his desperate attempt to intellectually control the uncontrollable, manifesting as a physical tear in reality.
A literal demon pit.
Right. And we watched human intellect and diplomacy fail entirely against the pure entropy of a subterranean demon, forcing reliance on a world-altering spiritual miracle.
Only to have the limits of that spiritual magic immediately exposed by the cold, bureaucratic reality of human soldiers.
Yes. The chapter meticulously strips away Zayn's reliance on both his own intellect and divine intervention, ultimately proving that when the magic burns out, it is human loyalty, quick thinking, and the quiet grit of allies in the shadows that secure survival.
It brings everything full circle.
Which brings us to a rather unsettling final thought. The chapter ends with them galloping through the dark, back on the path toward Yemen, hoping to find sanctuary with Kanu's distant relative. But think about everything we just learned.
It's ominous.
Very ominous. At the start of the day, Zayn was having a panic attack, paralyzed by the fear that this complete stranger might betray them to the spies. Since then, they've been ambushed by royal troops and rescued by a masked loyalist. They now know for an absolute fact that Nebuchadnezzar's spy network is vast, highly organized, and deeply embedded everywhere.
And perhaps more importantly, Zayn knows his spiritual safety net is compromised.
Right.
If they walk into a trap, Vanya cannot just rain lightning down to fix a political betrayal.
Exactly. The paranoia Zayn felt at the beginning of the chapter. It wasn't just anxiety, it was completely justified. So what happens when they finally cross that border and stand face to face with this unknown relative?
That's the million-dollar question.
Knowing the miracles are on cooldown, and the Empire is watching every shadow, are they truly galloping toward the sanctuary they've been bleeding for? Or are they just riding blind into an even deeper, inescapable trap?
The tension is just unbearable.
You have to wonder how long quiet human grit can hold out against an entire empire. We will just have to see where the desert takes them next. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.